Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Heaney, and I am the chairman for the evening. On my left is the vice chairman, also for the evening, Councillor McWilliams. The other councillors who are members of the committee are sitting on the tables on either side of the room, and the committee is going to debate and vote on the applications. On my left and right are the TDC officers, including the head of planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee meeting. It is important that the committee members can hear the presentations and debate, and therefore please remain quiet and do not interrupt the speakers, although I don't see many people in the audience who are liable to interrupt the speakers tonight. The order of business for each planning application is officer presentation, public speaking, any further comment from the officer, and committee members ask questions and debate and vote. This meeting is being recorded by the council. The committee apologies. I know there's apologies from Councillor White. I don't think there's any other apologies, are there? No. Minutes of the last meeting. Can I sign those as correct? Thank you. Let's put the date on, whichever it was. What's the date today? 28th of February. Signed them actually. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to A1, item 4 on the agenda, land east of Bromley Road, Lawford, I'm the ward member for the area, and also at the outline application, which was some time ago now, I was predetermined, so I've been advised that I'm not to take part in any debate or vote on the matter, but I don't have to leave the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to actually state that under the enforcement document we have before us tonight, I am now the portfolio responsible for that. The picture may say something different, but it is now comes under my portfolio. Okay, thank you.
Try to change your look since the started, and I've got to declare an interest of A3. That's land of the Clacton Road, Elmstead Market, because as ward member. And I'm going to move the corporate enforcement strategy up the... sorry, did anybody else have a... Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Everett.
I'm predetermined on A2 because that won't be heard tonight. That's probably not relevant.
No. Excellent. Actually, in fact, I totally failed to say that A2, the planning application 16/0152/full, 82 Jaywick Lane, Clacton-on-Sea, CO16 8BB, has been deferred and will return to this committee at a later time. And I'm just about to say that the corporate enforcement strategy has come to the committee for us to send our comments back to the Cabinet, and we're going to take that now, so Ms Heath can go home in a decent time.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a draft corporate enforcement strategy as it stands. It was considered by Cabinet in December, and Cabinet have asked that it goes to the Community Leadership and Partnership Committee, to the Planning Committee and to the Licensing Committee for any comments to go back to Cabinet before they determine the final strategy. So the intention of the strategy is that it sets an overarching umbrella principles under which the council will operate when it's undertaking enforcement. I'm sure it's the case that individual department, planning, environmental licensing will have their own detailed policies that set out the legislation and guidance under which they specifically work. But as I say, the idea of this strategy as a corporate strategy is to set those umbrella principles under which all departments will work. I think the sort of relevant bits that I was going to refer to most start on page 126, which is really setting out the sort of key headlines of the approach that the council wants to try and adopt. And I think having the corporate strategy set out fulfills two areas really. It gives officers an overall approach that hopefully they can follow and will give consistency in terms of how different officers deal and different departments deal with enforcement, although obviously they will have specifics under their particular areas of legislation. And also, hopefully, through the development of the service standards that are attached at the back, it will give the public a clear message about how we're dealing with enforcement and give some consistency to them. So the key headlines under Section 4 that I think sort of encompass what this is trying to achieve are that we'll be open and transparent. That sort of comes back to the point I was just making about being clear to the members of the public how we're going to approach enforcement. Helpfulness, so this is about the fact that we won't just necessarily go out and start, with a sledgehammer enforcement. That might be appropriate in some cases, but where it isn't, and where we can perhaps try and reach a conclusion through less rigorous means by discussion or consultation, etc., let's try and do that. And also perhaps being helpful to people about guiding them and directing them into how they can be compliant, rather than necessarily just starting enforcement. So it obviously depends on the circumstances, but that is one of the principles that it's looking to adopt. Consistency, which is what I was just saying, so being consistent for the departments that operate under this policy and consistent for the members of the public to see how we will approach enforcement. Being proportionate, again, it's about how much resource you put in to solving enforcement matters. So, it can be a bit of a dichotomy, because you can see that sometimes the enforcement issues that are most visible to the public are the smaller things like abandoned cars or litter or things like that, but are not necessarily the big enforcement issues that is facing the council that may need legal input. So I think it's trying to get that balance between what is concerning to the public sometimes and what actually is the big enforcement cases that can have a big impact as to whether they're compliant or not. Being targeted, I think we have to accept as a principle that we're not going to be able to deal with every single enforcement case or every single complaint that comes to the council, because there just isn't the resource to be able to do that. So it's about being targeted on which ones you deal with. So you can be targeted on the ones that will have high impact in terms of publicity, and hopefully if somebody here sees that this issue is being enforced against it, or prevent other people doing the same thing. So it's about being targeted about enforcement. You can be targeted about particular types of things. So are things causing particular eyesores or something? So I think it's about being clear about how you're going to target your resources. And the last point on there is about being accountable. So obviously it's standing up and accepting where we've taken action, that is the right action, and why we're taking that action. So I think those are the important principles and the key principles of what the strategy's looking to put in place. I wasn't going to say too much more about it. As I said at the beginning, the idea is to develop some service standards that kind of encompass those principles and are available for the public, so that it's clear how we're going to deal with enforcement cases. But I'm happy to take any questions. I'll answer them as best I can, or any comments that anybody wants to feed in that we'll take back to Cabinet when they're determining the final strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Neath. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Ms Neath? Anything you wish to say? Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, are we as a committee ever involved in any of this? Does it come under anything at all in our remit, or is it just purely and simply the officers and the portfolio holders as far as enforcement goes? Are we told of anything?
But I believe that I believe enforcement is the response is delegated to officers. Am I correct in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the planning enforcement functions of the council are delegated through this committee to the head of planning services. There are some pieces of action where it's delegated to the head of planning in conjunction with the head of legal, so where it's involving taking legal action such as injunctions.
If we ever put enforcement, to the notice of the planning, do we keep in the loop, or is it just that's it? They'll be told about it as it progresses?
Part of the system for dealing with planning enforcement complaints is to feed back to anybody who makes a complaint or, raises an issue with us that we then investigate. It might take days, it might take months, and occasionally it takes years. But we will certainly share the final outcome and obviously give updates along the way if that's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chair. This report also came in front of Community Leadership and Partnership, of which I'm Chair, so I have put comments forward, and I would just really cover those same comments in terms of looking at how the public perceive our consistency and approach to be. I think it's deemed to be poor. It's okay saying we'll be proportionate, it's okay saying we'll be targeted, but actually it's those ones that cause less harm, that have public perception at a low ebb in terms of our enforcement activities. I would like us to look at investigating whether there is any possibility that we can charge or recover costs, not charge, recover costs in a similar way to the HSE, perhaps. As I say, I've already said those comments, but where cost recovery, where a breach has been made, we've proved there's been a breach, the work that goes into that, I'd like to see us trying to do cost recovery and charging the persistent offender that money back. Thank you.
Comments? Councillor Baker.
Chairman, I won't go through them all because Karen wrote them all down at the Community Leadership and Partnership. I did have a few, and I'd just like to reiterate a couple. And it was about the page 22, the bottom paragraph, with regard to the case review, about sort of ward councillors being invited to that case review in case they wish to provide further information. So I think it's quite important, especially if those ward councillors sit on planning and it is a planning matter. Whether that is appropriate would have to be sort of deemed by either the legal services as to whether that would be appropriate for that particular case. And also, I think I mentioned about the ward councillor's role with regard to enforcement, which is on page 23. There's quite a few there, and I mentioned that maybe that could be in a member's briefing, and I still think that should be possibly arranged if possible. I know it's not in the document, but it might be an idea so that at least all ward members know that they have a role in regard to this document. That's all I have to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I, like Councillor Fairley, have a concern around cost recovery. In a time of austerity, and we have to think carefully about the costs and recovery of those, it seems to me that this scheme perhaps could do a little bit more in terms of actually making sure that, particularly where there are persistent breaches, that recovery of costs is actually more assiduously pursued. And I wonder whether we can feed back to wherever this goes next, that would be perhaps a concern.
Chairman, this was raised at CLAP again, and I mentioned about I think our concern was that if enforcement action was taken as a last resort, really, in relation to certain matters whereby people had benefited from their unlawful acts, I should put it like that their proceeds of that can be recovered. Now, there is a way that can be done. I don't think that we employ any staff that are qualified to undertake that, but there is a draconian piece of legislation that allows civil recovery in certain cases, and I think that should be explored.
Perhaps you know the name of the legislation?
Yes, Proceeds of Crime Act and Civil Recovery.
I thought it probably was, but I think perhaps you can pass all information you have on to Ms. Heath about that act. Or you would know that, wouldn't you?
I don't know whether Kath wants to.
Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a comment. I think we just have to bear in mind that most breaches of planning control are not crimes. So it's not a criminal offence to undertake something without planning permission. Only becomes an offence when there's non-compliance with an enforcement notice. So there are occasions, and there are examples of planning authorities using that legislation and recovering some costs. But it'd probably be, I think, fairly unusual circumstances. We rarely get to that point where there's a criminal offence that occurs, certainly in the planning field. Obviously, this is a corporate document and it covers other areas as well, and I can't really comment on those.
Ms Parker would like to say something.
Just picking up on that, really, like Kath said, it does cover other areas, and just to reassure members, the Proceeds of Crime Act and POCA, and we haven't got anyone actually qualified within the authority to do it. However, we have got links with other authorities, with people that are qualified, and that is something that we have used on previous occasions, and you know, we'll refer on and use their expertise and bring that in-house to help us if necessary. So there is those links there, and we are able to do that in appropriate circumstances.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Given the answer just given, I wonder whether there is a piece of work to explore whether there are other avenues that we could take to recover costs where they become particularly in persistent breaches. If we cannot do that under the Proceeds of Crime Act because it isn't a crime, then perhaps we should look to other methods to do that. And I would like to suggest that that be fed back.
Yes. Is the legislation, do you think, to do that sort of thing? Would you say that? I would agree with that. I mean, get all the money you can back from people.
Yeah, there are occasions when we can, and we have done historically, recovered costs. It's not really set up to be sort of punitive, so to sort of punish people because there's been a breach. But in terms of actually genuinely recovering expenditure that the council's incurred, there was a case a year or so ago now where actually we received a substantial amount of money from somebody who had cost the council a lot of money to pursue a persistent breach of planning control. And another way that in that case, we got very close to forcing that person to sell a piece of property in order to be able to recover those costs. When we serve 215 notices, so untidy land notices, we can then put a charge on the land. So when the land is sold, we can recover the costs. But the difficulty is, quite often, people who allow property to become in that state have bigger debts to pay than those to the council. And so we're not the first call on that property when it's sold. We're usually some way down the pecking order. And so the likelihood of recovering that money is fairly low.
Does anybody else wish to say anything else? Are we all happy with the document then, the way it's worded, and can send it on to the Cabinet with these comments which Ms Heath has no doubt taken down? All those in favour, please show. That's universal, or that's not quite the right name. Unanimous. Thank you so much. I'm not used to doing this. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms Heath, for preparing the document and coming to the meeting. Yes. Now, we'll go back to planning, and the first one is planning application 15/0087/6/out, land east of Bromley Hall Road, Lawford, CO11 2HS, and that's page 7. This is really about the extension for the 106 agreement to take place, which I understand is nearly finalised, just as an extension of time. But Mrs. Guyver.
No, that's correct, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Yes, this application has been before the committee last year, summer of last year, and it was resolved to approve the planning permission subject to Section 106 to be completed within 6 months. We didn't quite achieve that, but we were so close. The 6 months have passed, so we're duty-bound to bring this back to committee to ask for additional time. I believe it is a scheme that the Council does want to support. It forms part of our housing supply calculations, and there's a lot of local benefits associated with the scheme, which was drawn up, if you remember, with the community. So as a quick reminder, the location of the site is off of Bromley Road, Dead Lane, Lawford. The Venture Centre I'm pointing to there, Bromley Road along here. This scheme includes for up to 360 dwellings, but includes key benefits such as the community hub, and you see in the description there, primary school access and picking up, dropping off point was a key benefit, camping field, all of these things came about through consultation with the community. They're the 5 parcels of land across which the application covers. There was a discussion last time, which is perhaps a bit irrelevant now, about numbers and different sites in the area. And that's where it is in the adopted local plan, but in the emerging local plan, which is not that version of the emerging plan, it's shown as a development to go forward. Photographs in and around the site, Bromley Road, the proposed point of access, which avoids those attractive trees along the frontage, the section of trees and hedges to come out for access, viewed from a different angle, the access arrangements, the quiet lane area, the dark corridor where the bat colonies exist, which is to be protected and retained and enhanced through the development, views over towards Lawford House, views over the field, Dead Lane to the south of the site, views over the very flat land from various angles, and the other access point onto Long Road, views onto the Long Road access, the Long Road access arrangements, all of which have been accepted by the committee last time this was discussed, development in the surrounding area, looking back at the development that exists, the indicative land use audit, which shows, broadly speaking, where different uses would go on the site. Of course, as an outline application, this will be followed in due course with a detailed reserved matters application, and I'm already in discussion with the applicant about that. There was some objections to the scheme at the time, as you remember. So that's the scheme, a whistle-stop tour through a reminder of the proposal. So we had 6 months to complete the 106. All of the items listed on page 10 are to continue to form part of the 106. There's no change there. It's just the devil's in the detail. And I have seen a draft of the 106, the terms of which have been agreed in principle by all parties, including this council, Essex County Council, and the applicants, and I am hopeful that it will be signed well before 28th of April to allow planning permission to be granted. But I ask the committee's permission for the head of planning to grant planning permission once that agreement is secured. Thank you.
Have we any comments? Anybody wish to comment? Councillor Gray.
Yeah, I noticed on that list there you've got on-site council housing. How many council houses are you intending to have on this site? That's what it says, on-site council housing and affordable housing. Now, the council housing side of it is quite an important thing as far as I'm concerned, because there seems to be so-called affordable housing which isn't affordable to the people that can't get in council houses. You've got 1,400 people on the list, and I want to know when we're going to start putting council houses up to house the local people that can't get a mortgage.
Councillor Gray, this is really about whether we just sign the 106 application. It's not about the planning of the whole thing.
Well,
but Councillor Gary will answer the question, but I'm just felt obliged to remind you that it's just the 106 agreement extension date that we're discussing now, because it did come before us as a planning application.
Yes.
And of course it is very important, as I agree with you, to have council houses. But I think Mr. Guy will explain that they're having a special trust for local people in this.
Yes, yeah, you'll be particularly pleased with this one, Councillor Gray, because there is actually the Lawford Housing Trust, which has been put in place to ensure that the properties provided on the site are provided to local people that have a housing need. There's 14 units. They're gifted units, so they go straight into the hands of the Lawford Enterprise Housing Trust rather than another mainstream housing association.
Any other comments? All those in favour of the extension? And we need a mover and a seconder. Sorry, I'm forgotten. I'm off for having not done this for several months. Councillor Holmes proposes, Councillor McWilliams seconds. All those in favour, please show. And Councillor Baker is unable to vote. That's approved then, and we now go on to Jaywick Lane 1 being deferred. We go on to A3, planning application 16/01994/detail, land off Clacton Road, Elmstead Market, CO7 7DE, starting on page 77. This is for 32 houses or dwellings.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a reserved matters application. So this is we're being asked to approve the detail of a scheme that, as an outline application, did come before the committee in 2015, but we resolved to refuse planning permission at that time over concerns about the impact of the development on that location on the eastern side of Elmstead Market. Unfortunately, the appeal was successful from the applicant's point of view, but the committee at the meeting did say that if the appeal was successful, that we wanted the reserve matters application to come back for the committee's determination. So as a reminder of the location of the site, it's on the very eastern edge of Elmstead Market, between the edge of the housing and Whiting's over to the east, which you may have seen parts of the site today. Aerial photograph. There's different things going on in the adjoining piece of land, which are perhaps not reflected completely on there. Site photographs. These are the most recent site photographs I took, and actually there's advertising the potential for the new houses. The development company is obviously very keen to get on with the scheme, hence the submission of reserved matters application. But you will recall from the discussion last time that actually it's a very well contained site within the hedges around the site, so visibility to the site is quite limited. These are some of the older photos I took at the original time, which are just a bit brighter because it was a nicer day when I took those. Just for context, the view along Clacton Road, looking both ways, and the other end from... It was a lovely day. There wasn't much traffic on that day. The site layout plan, remember that the principle of development is already established through the grant of outline planning permission from the planning inspectorate. So there should be no debate about that. We're really into the detail of the layout appearance of the scheme. So here is the proposed layout. And I recall the outline application, there was members expressed a concern about the use of shared surfaces. You note that hasn't been carried forward. The developer did listen. So we're going for a traditional footpath carriageway arrangement throughout the site. It's also a traditional perimeter block style development. What I mean by that is you have properties facing properties, or alternatively properties backing onto properties to ensure the maximum amount of security and the best efficiency of layout. And on this scheme, you can see that the properties to the very east of the site actually back onto the adjoining land, and some of the properties have sort of exceptionally large gardens, but all of the plots on there exceed or meet the council's expectations for garden spaces. The proposed open space meets with the policy requirements of the council and is located here on the western side of the site, which is good in urban design views because as you enter the site, you will be greeted by this area of open space, and these larger properties here actually look over the open space, giving it lots of surveillance and safety. All of the plots are compliant with the parking standards. I provide a schedule of all of the individual plots within the scheme here. There is a mix of property sizes within there. And I'll just run through the mix now, which will be on page 85. So we've got some larger properties, 11 5-bed, 6 4-bed houses, 14 3-bedders, and on this particular scheme, there was the option of having the 25% discounted properties on site or one gifted dwelling that would go to the council. The gifted affordable house has been confirmed by the housing department as being acceptable. It's this one at the north of the site, which is a 3-bed property. If I turn now to some of the designs, all of the properties are either 1.5 or 2-bed. There's no 2.5 story or 3-story dwellings. At outline stage, I remember members expressed a concern about potential 2.5 story. The developer has listened and has come back with a scheme that doesn't exceed 2 stories for any property. So here is house type A1, an internal layout for you there. A2, a slight variation, different uses and materials throughout. And I'll show you some indicative street scenes which should actually bring the whole thing to life. A different design, different variation. Again, traditional property, quite substantial plots. House type C1, different design, gable end, proposal, porch, and a variation with render rather than brick on the front. But indicative materials have been supplied within the application as well, and you'll see how they would work when I show you the indicative street scenes. C3 is a variation on C1. C2, just slightly different uses of materials, really. And there's the affordable unit, which is a bit simpler than the others, but not excessively so, in officer's view. It's a 3-bedroom unit, and it meets the spec provided by our housing manager, who would take receipt of this scheme into the council's housing stock. The designs of the garages that would go with it, the double garage, single garage, another double garage with a different roof pitch design. You see it there, pyramid roof on that one, straight roof on that one. These are nice. The proposed street scenes are a bit small on there. They're bigger on the big screen, obviously, but it gives you an indication of the different uses of materials, the spacing between the properties, the use of garages between the properties along the different frontages. We had this little game in Chairman's Briefing, Spot the Council House. It's this one here. And it's in this location where there's not really much to go on in terms of design that you should follow, because it is slightly separate from the built-up area. Actually, we're looking for a good quality scheme. We're not looking for it to follow any particular precedent, but in officer's view, this is a good quality design that provides variation in terms of design features and materials. Going back to the site layout plan, as again, if I summarise, then the principle of development has been accepted. We are being asked to approve the design, layout, and the more detailed aspects of it. No objections from the general public. We did have the parish council wrote in and requested if we could secure as part of the scheme a multi-use games area. But unfortunately, because the outline permission was granted by the planning inspector, and at outline stage, that's when you would have a section 106 to secure a multi-use game area or anything like that. But the inspector approved the scheme with its own unilateral undertaking, which doesn't provide for a multi-use games area. We can't legally ask for one as part of the scheme. But it does comply with the council's regular open space standards, and the Section 106 agreement that is in place secures the council house and also the contributions towards education. And these are summarised under page 90. The recommendation is approval.
Councillor Holmes, you wish to say something?
Yeah, I think myself and Mr Baker are concerned here. With this 106, can we put any... I don't know if it's too late to put anything on the 106 or conditions. Is it? Yep, sorry.
We can't alter the 106 because that has to be established at outline stage. Conditions, most of the general conditions were dealt with at outline stage by the inspector, but you can have additional conditions on a reserve matters application as long as there's a good justification for them. I'm not suggesting anything over and above approving the detailed plans at the moment, but you can have some additional if you...
Well, I think myself and Mr Baker were more concerned about extensions and loft conversions because, you know, this is a nice looking site and we believe that anything that goes on, you know, can we take away is it a statutory right? I don't know as far as extensions go and loft conversions go.
I mean, new development has permitted development rights that allows certain things to take place without the need to apply for planning permission. I mean, the council has powers to remove certain permitted development rights, but really there needs to be a strong justification for it. And in my experience, you tend to do that if you've got a higher density development, where an extension would cause perhaps a public amenity problem or a private amenity problem. You might do that kind of thing in a conservation area or an area that's particularly sensitive to change, like St Osiph, for example. On those applications, we remove development rights. But other than those exceptional circumstances, I wouldn't advise removing permitted development rights unless there is a genuine concern about what's likely to happen.
Only I think you said to start with it's 2 stories across the whole site. I mean, I don't know why that was put in. I mean, I assume it's because you don't want any building on top or next door. That was already on there, so I don't know what that means, actually.
Okay. When the outline planning application came in, there were indicative drawings were provided, and at that stage there was sort of a mixture of 2, including some 2.5 storey, where you have sort of dormer windows in the roof. And at the time, the committee expressly stated that it wasn't too keen on those. And the developer went away. They won their appeal, but they have taken on board the committee's concerns, and they've come back with a scheme that extends no higher than 2 storeys. The actual mix of development on here and the designs will be reflective of market demand. So there is a market demand for housing, family housing within this location. There's no single-storey dwellings provided, but the developers would have done their own market research to come to that view. But no, it's all restricted to 2 storeys. There are no...
So does that stop the building of the lofts? That particular...
No, they could convert lofts under permitted development rights, but they're not proposing to build them in that form. The proposal is to build them in this form with 2 storeys.
I'm just going to bring up about the drainage. Originally, in the absence of an updated surface water drainage strategy, we object to this application, this is Essex County Council Flood Authority, and recommend refusal of planning permission until a satisfactory one has been submitted. Then one is submitted, obviously, and they have no objection to conditions. And then they put NB, the appeal decision granted outline planning permission subject to a condition that the details of surface water drainage arrangements were to be agreed prior to commencement of development. That will definitely take place. You haven't had anything from them, have you, subsequently?
Yes. Yes, what's happened there is I think the County Council SUS department got a bit keen there because under the planning condition applying to the outline permission, the developer would have had to submit a suitable drainage scheme for the County Council to consider anyway before they went ahead with the development. The County Council have gone a step far by saying we shouldn't approve planning permission until that's agreed. They can't really do that because we would have to have it agreed before they start development anyway. So we don't see it as an issue. The developer has provided the information that the County Council required. A lot of it was actually provided at outline stage, but I don't think the County Council had spotted that. So issues of drainage do look acceptable, and to discharge that condition, they would be considered by the Drainage Authority again and will discharge the conditions so that they can undertake the development. But it doesn't prevent us from approving this scheme at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guyver. Councillor Benison, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that the one council house, looking at the plan, it looks as though that's the only one that doesn't have a garage. Would it be possible for one to be included? Because everybody else has storage space and this one doesn't.
Thank you. Yes, so the single plot here doesn't include a garage. Of course, providing a garage is an additional cost for development, and this property is to be gifted to the council. So long as it complies with parking standards, so there are 2 parking spaces available to it, whether that be within a garage or not. There's no policy reason why we should force the developer to provide a garage, and the housing manager in the housing department has always expressed that they're content with the dwelling that's to be provided without a garage.
Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chair. In some respects, I had a similar question to Councillor Benison. Looking at the pictures, it is quite obvious the council house stands out. Is that normal, or is that okay? Are we allowed to suggest that perhaps it's more in line with the other properties there? It's my first question. I've got 4.
Okay. I mean, as I say, the specification, the size of it has been agreed with the housing department. It's slightly different, not excessively so, I wouldn't say. From a planning officer's perspective, it obviously appears a bit smaller, but it's not so obvious that it sticks out like a sore thumb, in my professional view. I've seen schemes in other boroughs, to be fair, where it's so obvious that the developer has tried to spend as little as possible on the affordable housing units and tuck them away in a horrible corner of the site where no one would ever go. The developer hasn't done that in this case. It forms part of the main frontage of the northern part of the development, and the design, compared with some of the things I've seen in other authorities, from my professional point of view, is acceptable.
Can I just come in? I'm going to go to you in a bit, but going on from that question, is there enough room to park 2 cars in front of it? Or somewhere. And I can't quite see in this little thing here. Thank you. Councillor Baker. Sorry, Councillor Fairley. Sorry, you have to wave at me.
Thank you.
Harder.
Also, on the site plan, there is in the back there, facing onto the back, is that a pump station? And where is there there's something else is that something electricity-wise that is right up the front? Yes. Is that normal for those things to be quite so close? Is that okay?
Yes, I mean, if they're requirements of the development, to make it deliverable and to make sure it's served by the utilities. There are regulatory standards that apply separately to those kind of facilities. And it's not uncommon for a pumping station or for a substation to be located quite close to the development, but there are separate regulations which cover their safety and security.
Thank you. It's always disappointing when a site goes to appeal and, you know, is then approved. However, having seen the plans, having seen the pictures, the layout, I was really quite, you know, it does look okay. I was really pleased to see that each of the gardens and everything is policy compliant. Sometimes we do see things come forward in front of us that aren't. So generally I'm actually really quite pleased with how it would appear it's going to look. My only comment would be, and that's in regard to the request from the parish council, which although I understand that you say you're not able to, you know, insist that that happens, are we able to ask the question by way of influencing if there is an opportunity for the developer to get together with the parish council to see whether there is something that they perhaps would be willing to engage with them in that way?
I have asked the question of the developer. I think the developer will tell me that they wanted to engage with the community at the early stage. At that time, it perhaps wasn't clear what the community wanted, but since then we have had approvals at Charity Field and at Church Road as well, and those developments are set to provide more substantial facilities on those schemes. Legally, there would be absolutely no reason why the developer should provide a multi-use games area in this location, and we would probably question as to whether a multi-use games area at this end of the village would be the right location for it, actually, when the recreational sort of hub is to the sort of south and to the north. So I've had a discussion with the developer about it, but I don't think we should push the developer to provide any more than they are doing through their Section 106 agreement.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions, Mr Guyver, please. Following on from Councillor Holnes's questions about permitted development, I've just scribbled down here, if one of the 3-bedroom houses, for argument's sake, whichever plot you want to look at, has only got 100 square metres garden size, and I know that's above the size that we look for a 3-bedroom property, if they decided to build a large extension, which then reduced the garden to under the policy size, where do we stand with that? So if you can answer that one first, then I've got another one, please.
No, we wouldn't be able to control that. No, if they build an extension under permitted development rights that takes away a certain amount of the garden and dips it below the standards, then the council wouldn't be able to control that. But then again, of course, that would be the choice of the householder. In doing that, in extending their property, they would have to weigh that against the fact that they're going to lose a bit of their garden as well.
Thank you. And I must admit, Councillor Fairley touched on it. The affordable housing unit. I know you say it's sits in and everything else, but to me it stands out, and I'm just minded that it's going to be one of our council properties, and when you put that slide up, it was, I know I can't see it very well, I bet that's the council house, and I just wonder if it can be made to blend in more with the others, is the words I'd use. I just remember the bad publicity that one council got with regard to red doors in Birmingham, I think it was. I just wouldn't want the people that live there to be not ostracised, but it sticks out to me. Thank you.
Just confer with my head of planning.
I'm going to take another question. I'm going to take another question now from Councillor Davis. Well, they're conferring. So, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I agree. It's a very attractive site, but I also have concerns over the council house. Not only that it doesn't have a garage, and it is obviously different to the others, but it's actually almost 20% smaller than the other three-bedroom houses. And I'm wondering if this is perhaps because people that need affordable housing are 20% smaller than the rest of us. I just think it is an unfortunate precedent, and a very large, spacious area, that this one house is so obviously different to the others.
Yes. Do you want to have you? I mean, I think hard to make sure I call everybody councillor, you see, instead of just their names.
Yes. I mean, if the committee feels that strongly, what we might suggest is that if the committee could resolve to approve the application subject to an amended plan to secure this plot as an equivalent to one of the other 3-bed plots that are already provided on the site, I think that's the best that we would be able to do.
I'm going to say something. Did you want to?
Please, Chairman, if I could. I'm just trying. I can't see from here. I'm blind as a bat. The plot next to it, to the left of the council house. What plot number is that, please? Is it 19? Yeah, you see, it was. Is it 18, 19, 20? Does it go from right to left?
That is 19, the one next to it.
19. I'm just thinking if we ask, if we're going to sort of ask that the developer takes note and changes the design or the look, then making it similar to the one next door would possibly negate the sort of concerns I have. But Councillor Davis has hit it on the head. It is smaller, got 20 square metres smaller than the smallest 3-bed. Just a comment, really.
What really concerns me is the pumping station. Could we go back and look where the pumping station is? I mean, it's right on top of that house there. Pumping stations tend to stink, quite frankly, without best will in the world. The pumping station opposite, which then pumps everything, all the sewage, it's more or less opposite there. The main pumping station, Elmstead Market, is known to overflow. And I don't, that one might overflow too. And as that site is situated, that pumping station is far too close to that house. Okay. They're not exactly the most salubrious of places.
My response to that, just so we're not under any misapprehension here, that is not a house, that's a garage.
Oh, that's a garage.
That's a garage, yeah. So the pumping station, the closest building to it is actually a garage block rather than a property. The consequences of not having a pumping station in terms of effluent is probably higher than having it there, and it is within the control of the developer's land. And in terms of where it's been positioned, I think some considerable thought has gone into how you get it in there. It's never nice to be the one next to one. I appreciate that. But it is closest to the garages rather than properties.
Sorry, I have real difficulty. I don't need distance glasses in theory, but I think I probably do, and it just can't see it through my reading glasses. So sorry, I can see now that it is a house. Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. If we are able to ensure that we look again at the council house, then I feel that I would be happy to put this forward for approval. Thank you.
That's for approval by Councillor Fairley and seconded by Councillor Holmes. Move for approval. All those in favour of approval, please show. Oh, yes, yes.
How long is the approval for?
3, what?
The extension on the
It's not
How long is
realistic.
it for? 6 months? A year?
No. What?
You're thinking of the previous one.
You're, yeah. Councillor, Mr. Guyver. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Can I obviously it's been posed and seconded, and I think we're probably all going to be in agreement, but with the proviso, as Councillor Fairley said, with regard to the council housing being made more similar, thank you, to the rest of it.
That will be included in the approval. Yes.
Sorry, on an outline application you get 3 years within which to confirm reserve matters, and there's a further 2 years to implement once the last of the reserve matters are agreed. Hopefully, given the developers' keenness to get this one off the ground and the fact that they are already in the process of discharging conditions, I shouldn't think that it's going to be an issue.
Thank you. Shall we go to the vote? All those in favour, please show. That seems to be everybody, so that's approved. We now go on to planning application 16/01873/FUL, the New Bell Inn, Outpart Eastward, it's difficult to say, Harwich, CO12 3EN, starting on pages 93.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the change of use of a small area of land. The reason for bringing it to committee is that the land is owned by the council, and so the council's constitution requires that the planning committee determine the application. Do you flick on for me? Cheers. This plan shows the site context. So the area edged in black, the sort of thick black line, is the public house, and the small red outline below it on the other side of the road is the application site, and that's the area of land that is proposed to change from use as a car parking area to a beer garden. I hesitated to say beer garden because it is a very small piece of land. It's paved, it was previously used as car parking, and it accommodates half a dozen tables and chairs. So it's not an extensive garden area, and it's not a sort of leafy green garden. It's an outdoor, it's a sitting out area, really. That's fine. The town centre for Harwich is off to the west of this site. So it's close to the town centre area, quite close to the sort of historic core of Harwich. The proposed use is supportive of tourism policies, of helping attract people to spend some time in Harwich to use the local facilities. Okay, Gary, thanks. Here's an aerial view. It's pretty much the same area as the plan before, so you should be able to locate yourselves fairly easily. The road that comes down from the top left corner of the photograph and does a little zigzag and carries on south is the sort of route for cars coming away from the quay and out of town. So it's not hugely trafficked, but that's a sort of relatively busy option. And then the road that curves around beside the site itself is the sort of the smaller road, which really just provides access to the facilities that are down there, which is sort of the sailing club, etc. The group of houses which are shown on the right-hand side of that aerial photograph are quite unusual. You will have seen them today when you visited the site, in that they are sort of terrace, but they face in towards each other, so the fronts of the houses look inwards. And then the back gardens of the properties that back onto that main road are that's it, delineated, by a very high, substantial brick wall surrounding a small garden or yard for each of those houses. So it's quite an unusual setup, an unusual relationship at the moment to that road and surrounding properties. Okay. And there are just a few photographs here. Probably when you were there today, the chairs and tables, I think, would not have been there. No. In fact, this is a retrospective planning application. I think genuinely the pub owner or licensee didn't realise that planning permission would be required for this use. When it was drawn to their attention, they did cease the use, but they clearly would like to be able to use it in this way, so have made the planning application. So you can see there, it's really quite modest in size. Must have been about 3 car parking spaces before, 4 car parking spaces. They've just paved it, put a fence up, there's some hanging baskets, a small planter. And the next couple of photographs just show that in a bit more detail. And then the last picture gives you the street view. So there you can see quite clearly the backs of the houses, the high brick wall, and then on the left of the picture is the pub to which it relates. It's slightly distorted because it's a Google Earth picture, so it's actually the roads are not that wide in reality compared to the height of the buildings. We've had one objection from the occupier of the first house immediately over the wall because of noise and disturbance. Our colleagues in Environmental Health have looked at this application and have commented they have no objection to the application. They haven't asked for a formal noise survey, having looked at the detail. I think taking into consideration that the alternative use would be to revert back to car parking, so there would be an amount of noise generated from that, of slamming of doors, starting of engines, people sitting in their cars, potentially, chatting. The proximity to the 2 roads, but particularly the main sort of road out of the old Harwich town. Environmental Health considered that a full noise assessment wasn't necessary, particularly with that high brick wall. Any noise generated is likely to sort of bounce away and not really be significantly more than the noise that would be generated by existing uses. We are proposing a condition to limit use to no later than 8 o'clock in the evening, and that fits with the applicant's current practice or practice last summer to remove the chairs and tables at that time in any case. So, Chair, the recommendation is one of approval with that condition to limit the hours of use.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that the objector has a secondary objection, that of smoke coming over the wall, which, although it is a very high wall, he speaks as though it has already happened. And as somebody who is vulnerable to cigarette smoke myself, I would have every sympathy with that. And I wondered if it is possible to put a non-smoking policy on that outside area as a restriction. Is that possible to do?
No.
Sorry. Thanks. I think this sort of outdoor seating area is often used by smokers because they can't use the inside of a pub for that purpose. So I suspect one of the reasons for wanting it is to provide an area for customers to smoke, unfortunately. Thinking about the tests for conditions, is that a reasonable condition and is it enforceable? I think we would really struggle to enforce a condition. I'm not aware that we've ever tried that sort of condition before. I'm looking at Charlotte for some advice, really.
I would be a bit worried about enforceability because we go back to obviously the current planning use is for car parking. There's nothing to stop somebody standing next to their car and smoking. Now you could have the same amount of people on the same piece of land. I'm not sure how we would justify that when we don't sort of enforce that kind of matter at the moment. We would struggle maybe with proportionality. It's difficult to see how that would really be enforceable. You've obviously got as well in terms of officers actually going out there to inspect, and I think that would be difficult.
Did you want to come back? You didn't want to come back? No. Councillor Everett. Zoe.
Yeah. Councillor Davis knocks it on the head for me as well, because I've been involved in a planning case with very similar argument, over an overlooking window and receiving issues from smoke pollution. The similar argument to what Charlotte said was actually given in this case, and the point that I would say that differentiates this is that if we were to give permission for this, it would be practically permanent smoking of a cigarette rather than the passing of a person out of a car onto somewhere else. So it would be a longer duration and therefore more likely to permeate up to the window above. I have concerns, as Councillor Davis does, on that very same reason, and also for similar reasons, because I actually suffer from asthma myself, and I would be concerned if I was living over an area that close to somewhere that was going to be used for smoking.
I have to say that I agree. The smoke will drift up over the wall there, and I noticed the window was open even today, even in this. It would be very difficult, and the sort of wind will probably blow it towards the building. That's what really worries me about this. Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chair. Although sympathetic with that view, I would have to say that actually with cars parking there, if people are coming out of the pub and they want to go and have a cigarette somewhere, then they are highly likely to just go. It's not going to be passing smoke. They're going to have sat in their car, on their car, lean on the bonnet. There would always have been, I think, that smoking happening. I don't feel that would make too much difference. That's my opinion. My question is related to the actual junction itself. I note in here that it says that 6.16, it's considered no appreciable highway safety issues would arise. When we're looking at the car park round the back, and where does that actually go to? If you're going from the pub through, if you're going off at that junction past the car park area, where does that go to, please?
It loops back round and rejoins this road.
And what's the car park there for?
I think it's the yacht club. Yeah, I think it's the sailing club next door. You can just see in the bottom of the photo, the top of the sailing club.
Thank you. Have highways been consulted on this as it is sitting on a junction? I couldn't see anywhere within the report where it says about consultation with highways.
You're right, they don't appear to have commented. I can try to double check whether they were consulted. It may just be that it's such a minor development that they would just pick it up from the list if they were concerned. But we'll just check the file for you.
Councillor Holmes, you finished? Sorry. Yeah. Councillor Holmes.
Everyone seems to be concerned about the smoking. I mean, I do know that if you actually use it as a smoking area and put a roof on it, it's not allowed to be connected up to a main wall, a central wall, and it got to be over no higher than 6 feet, 2 metres. But I don't know if you could put a very small one, like just a parasol, if they could build a parasol to stop the smoke going up over the wall.
It's not part of the planning application.
No, there are no proposals to put up a structure at the moment. And in the issue with smoking structures usually is that they have to be very open in order to allow smoke to escape. And so, I don't think it would make a significant difference to the sort of generation of smoke, if you like, and where it ended up. In terms of the highways, we didn't consult highways. It would have been below the threshold in terms of scale. I think we just have to bear in mind that it was used for car parking before, and given the layout there, cars would have had to either stop in the road and reverse on, or go on forward and reverse out. So, you know, there's some danger in doing that. That's been replaced with the possibility of pedestrians crossing at that point. But it is a pretty minor road, not going to many properties at all, at pretty slow speeds, having come around that little sort of chicane. So I think as the planning officer has obviously sort of weighed it up and thought that's a pretty limited danger.
Councillor Holmes, you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, he's been doing it already. I'm inclined to go for approval on this. And it's, if you turn it back into a car park, if they sit there with a car running, it's going to be worse, especially with diesel cars apparently now, are worse than petrol cars. So I'll go for approval.
Are you moving it for approval?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I've got another one. Two. Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was going to actually say that when it was a car park previously, there would have been petrol and diesel fumes coming up. But you can actually buy smoking shelters that are steel and perspex, that, because I've looked into them before, and they bolt to the ground and come up and curve over the top. So that would prevent the cigarette smoke going backwards, but bring it out forwards.
Would it be possible to condition that to have a smoking shelter?
Oh, sorry.
Well, this application isn't for a structure, so the committee needs to determine the application as it is. And I think there would be pros and cons in terms of providing a shelter. I suspect there will be more people would spend more time out there because they're given that shelter. And there's also the sort of visual impact as well, and the impact on that terrace and the high wall, and it would change the character. I think it is in the conservation area.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. To come back on the smoking, over the summer months when people will want their windows open, if there are cars parked there and there might be one or two people smoking a fag and then going off, but if there are 3 or 4 tables with 2 or 3 people on each table smoking constantly through the afternoon and early evening, that is going to make a big difference. And it's not just going in the open windows, because the windows would be open in summer. The gentleman or lady, whoever, says here that they already have had smoke in their garden over the wall that's drifted over, that's made it impossible. I mean, we don't know, they may have breathing problems, for them to use their garden. So really, unless we can suggest some sort of shelter, as has already been outlined, this person is going to have to move.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. One of the conditions is opening times 9:30 to 8. When we were there at something like 5 to 11, I think it was, that was when they were putting out the board to say, hey, we're open. I just wonder why so early. And I mean, I sympathise with the woman that lives there with regard to smoking. Being an ex-smoker, I'm sort of more passionate about it, unfortunately. But they also mentioned noise. And I know Environmental Health have said there's no problems or anything like that, but can we put an informative or something on, not necessarily a condition, that some sort of sign goes up, you know, you are next to somebody's house, don't be noisy, or something similar. So the question is, why so early for them to be there? I totally agree with them clearing away at 8 o'clock.
I'll go to Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. I don't smoke. I used to. And I don't drink, so I've got no interest in pubs at all. However, when this area was being used without the permission, obviously, but that they weren't aware that they should have applied for planning permission, I drove past there one day, and what I saw was families sitting outside. I didn't see plumes of smoke All right, I did see families sitting there with noisy children, perhaps outside, far better than being in the pub. And I do know that the smokers at that pub do go in the smoking area that is at the back of the pub in the beer garden, round the back. Yeah, and there is support for this with local people. I know there is, but I think for the tourism aspect and people in Harwich, to just sit outside there and have a beer up to 8 o'clock at night is absolutely fine, and I would support the application. So I shall second that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're just going to get a bit of information now, if we managed to find out.
Yeah, a couple of things. The applicant has actually suggested an 11 a.m. start. So if members feel it'd be better to change that condition to 11 in the morning until 8 in the evening, can't see any problem with that. And just to balance out, yes, there's been the one objection, but to follow on from what Councillor Fowler was saying, there is a substantial petition in support of the application as well, which sort of reflects the views that Councillor Fowler was just describing.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you. With the information just given to us by Councillor Fowler, I wonder whether we could put an informative on this that suggested signage to send people to the smoking area in the Bell Inn itself, because that might help alleviate the problem on this particular location.
Yeah, to respond to that, I think an informative is absolutely fine in terms of the signage. And we have to remember also, although you're determining the planning application, we're also the landlords on this site. So I'm quite happy to go away and have a conversation with property just about trying to ensure that it is sort of managed well to respect, neighbouring properties.
Anything else that anybody wants to say? This is moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. We now come to planning application 16/01925/full, land south of Mill Lane, Weeley Heath, CO16 9BG, starting on page 101. So let's just 6.
Fill in for a moment.
Okay. 6 three-bedroom detached bungalows.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application. That's it. Thank you. There's the site plan. The history of this site is that planning permission was granted in outline last year for up to 6 dwellings, and so the applicant could have come forward with an approval reserve matters application. They've chosen not to. They've chosen to come forward with a full application. I don't know, but I suspect that might be because the land has transferred, and so they're sort of to a new owner and they're starting afresh. But we just need to bear in mind that on the one hand, you should think about the principle of development because it is a full application, but also the history is relevant. There's an extant planning permission which could be implemented. Here's an aerial photograph, and so the site sits on the northern part of that arable field. You can see really clearly from that it's surrounded on 3 sides by residential development, and the application site is sort of slice across the top part of that field, filling in that existing gap. This slide shows the development, the settlement boundary in the adopted plan, the 2007 plan, and there's a black arrow there just pointing at the general area of this site. So you can see it is close to, but outside the existing settlement boundary. In the emerging plan, it would be inside, as would some of the development on either side of it. The next photographs show the site itself. You will have seen that when you visited on the bus this morning. So in this photograph, the site is on the right-hand side of the picture. You can see there are sort of remnants of a hedgerow along the frontage, but it's rather scrappy and it's quite open actually along a lot of the frontage. And there's another photograph, slightly different view, looking straight over the front boundary, fronting the road into the site. And another photograph on this one, the site, it's on the left-hand side of this photograph. There's another photograph which shows the close, which is opposite the site, with a bungalow development in there. And then the final photograph shows number 3, which is to the east of the site, on the same side of the road, and that's the listed building that Gary's pointing to there, with an extension to it. So that extension sits between the listed building and the application site. Okay, this plan shows the layout. There are proposed to be 2 points of access into the site, and each of the 2 points of access would serve 3 bungalows. They're set out in a sort of gentle arc between the existing pattern of development in the street. As I say, all bungalows served from a private drive. There's a ditch that you will have seen that runs between the highway and the properties. It lies within the ownership of the applicant. He will have to apply to the flood authority, to the county, to do works to it. The proposal is, and it has been discussed with the county, to culvert just under the crossings where the access points come in, and to leave the rest of it open. The ditch will be cleared, and then ownership of that will be transferred to the owners, the purchasers of the properties. The likely arrangement is there will be some shared responsibility for the shared driveways and areas, the ditch and the crossing at the front, between those new property owners. And the final slide, it's not especially clear, but it shows the landscaping scheme. It shows it's proposed to have a hedgerow at the front, so to reinforce that hedgerow with indigenous species, and hedging at the back to make a sort of soft boundary to the field. At the moment, we don't have enough detail, so we to be able to sort of approve that at this stage, although it's a full application, so proposing a condition so that further details would be submitted to us in due course. And then actually the next slides show the designs of the properties themselves. So there are 3 or 4 different house types or bungalow types, but all quite similar. They fit in quite well together, traditional sort of bungalow form with the hipped roofs, garages for each, adequate parking, fairly generous rear gardens, even though they are bungalows. So I think a positive addition to that street scene. And the next few slides show the individual property types. So the recommendation, Chair, is one of approval.
Thank you very much. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Can you tell me what provisions there are in terms of the ditch to make sure that children don't fall into them?
I don't think there are any specific provisions. I think the experience of the developer is that certainly since they've had an interest in it, there hasn't been water or significant amount of water in the ditch. It's not a sort of deep, fast-flowing river or stream. No doubt at times of heavy rain it would be wet. But no, I don't think there are any particular provisions to fence it. I think that would probably be out of character with this area.
Councillor Benison.
Thank you. Following on from Councillor Everett's question, you talked about culverts underneath drives, and presumably they'd have grid protection on either end of in case there was a flood and a child fell in, they wouldn't be sucked into the culvert.
Well, they'll need permission from the county in terms of the detail, so those sorts of safety issues I'm sure would be part of what they address. But the diameter of that pipe, I think, is only 450 mil, so it's only about like that. So it would have to be a small toddler, I think. But yeah, I'm sure the county would, for a number of reasons, safety and also just wanting to avoid it becoming blocked, would want put a grill on the end.
Keep the leaves out. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that one of the conditions, number 13, removal of permitted development rights for the fencing, walls and means of enclosure on the southern boundary. Can you just explain that a bit more as to why, please?
Yes. I think that's probably the best view to have to discuss this. It is quite a rural edge, the southern boundary. So normal permitted development rights would allow the occupiers to put up a means of enclosure up to 2 metres in height without the need for planning permission, and that could be of any material. So it could be a big brick wall, close boarded fence, it could be a very harsh boundary. Whereas I think officers' view is it should be something softer really in that location. And so that's the reason for wanting control. It's not to say they couldn't have a 2 metre high fence or something quite substantial, but it's to give us some control over the detail of that. And it would also allow us to make sure that all 6 are not all completely different and sort of stand out from each other, so some sort of continuity.
Any further questions? Is anybody wants to move something?
I'll move.
Councillor Williams.
Yep.
You're moving, sorry.
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to move that we approve.
Councillor Fairley? I'll second that. Okay, it's moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Fairley. All those in favour, please show. That's everybody. So that's approved. And I think this is the end of the planning committee, which is pretty good for 7:30, or nearly 7:30. Yes.
Not forever.
The end of the planning committee for ever and a day.
Councillor White comes back and there's no committee.
Councillor White comes back, there's no committee. It's a bit of a shock.